Good evening. Welcome to the Good Night Air. I'm Cutter. Today I'm going to start off with my first video regarding movements on this playlist. The initial video, or maybe even two, will be a general overview of modern art, how art has changed, and the various movements that comprise modernism. But this is the first one I'm really going to dive into in a little bit more detail. It's only a 4-minute video. A lot of these I found as intros to these often obscure art movements of the modern era tend to be very short, and I actually kind of like that. It allows me to have kind of like 10, 15 to 20-minute videos where I kind of talk a little bit about some of the elements that are explained, give my basic reaction to them. I have heard and kind of elite, or maybe even studied a lot of these, or many of them, or maybe even all of them. But I have a big list of them, so there are certain elements that I am completely unaware of, and so I'll probably be taken by surprise by certain things, and including how some of them are pronounced. I'm not the greatest speaker with regards to foreign movements, especially, but yeah. Anyway, on that note, Pre-Raphaelitism. I think there's a different emphasis on the way it's spoken than I say it. We will hear it in a second here. Actually it's a favorite movement of mine. Not necessarily the background of it. It's basically just a collection of like 7 or 8 maybe artists who came together right around the time of like the 1848, I think it was, revolutions in Europe. This is an English movement more. And there are a couple of poets, I think, involved as well. But they came together and they started, painting these kind of very beautiful, often at the same time subtle. I mean, look at this painting, behind me on this frozen screen. It's just this lady standing up and stretching her back, right? So there's a certain amount of subtlety that's kind of applied to otherwise very detailed, somewhat realistic, representational art. And I would say even, I would take it as idealized in some capacity, but especially symbolic. There's so much symbolism in each of these things. So I've, ever since seeing them, I think many people, if they're at all involved in literature, art, or history, you've seen these kinds of paintings. They're often used for, covers of classical, books, published as like paperback or stuff like that. So I think if you've seen them before, you'll probably know what I mean when I say that upon first viewing, you're kind of taken by the colors and the vividness of each scene. But okay, on that rambling introductory note, which is basically just pure opinion, how it goes here, let's jump into this. This is from HENI Talks, HENI. It's kind of like, I think it's like a nonprofit of some sort. It seems to be something that connects people with artists, or to buy art, or to train in understanding art, or there might be lessons involved. I kind of took a cursory look at the website, but kind of forgotten a lot about it. So anyway, let's jump into this 4-minute introduction of what is this Pre-Raphaelite movement. Hopefully it's pretty good. We'll see.
The Pre-Raphaelites were a group of young art students who set out to revolutionise British art, and really they were the first British modern art movement. They felt art should be important, significant, much more truthful, not conventional, but looking at the new world. This was kind of quite interesting timing. It was 1848, and in 1848, many other countries in Europe had popular revolutions, and suddenly there was part of this revolutionary spirit about these art students. The group, they called themselves the Brotherhood, were formed by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, William Holman Hunt, and John Everett Millais. They got themselves up to the number of 7, and they called themselves the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. The key word there is Raphaelite. They had nothing against Raphael or any of those sort of great artists. What they didn't like was people who sort of just used them as a shortcut to their own style, the Raphaelites. The Pre-Raphaelites were absolutely adamant that they wanted to make paintings that were really rich in their meanings, and so they very often took ideas for subjects from the literature they really admired, Shakespeare, Keats and so on. They also took ideas from the Bible. Millet painted Christ in the house of his parents. Jesus and his family had been painted as everyday working people, and Millet went out and he got a grocer to model for the figure of Joseph so he could show sort of arms, muscular working arms. The public were horrified by this because they were used to seeing, particularly the Holy Family, idealised, again like a Raphael. But what Millet was exploring was the dignity of real life, the dignity of labour.
So I mentioned before, I would take it as a different form of idealization, in a way, where it's not focusing on the spiritual aspect of the Holy Family, obviously, but rather it's idealizing the working class by placing them in the role of the Savior and in the role of the great Holy Family. I mean, that seems clear to me, at least, symbolically speaking. It makes sense because of all the popular revolutions that overturned many of the aristocracies and monarchies in Europe at the time, which eventually culminated and continues to this day in the form of various forms of socialism, communism, that kind of stuff. And I think it kind of reflects that clearly, that sentiment here, where it's the working class, it's the laborer that is kind of vaulted literally into the form of Saint Joseph, the father of Jesus Christ himself. All right, so anyway, let's keep going.
Again, this reflects on their politics of the time. The Pre-Raphaelites adopted only the brightest colours, and sometimes these were very traditional colours used by the early Italian artists, and sometimes there were new modern industrial pigments like this vibrant emerald green that you see both in Ophelia and our English coasts. And they'd use very, very tiny brushes to apply the colour, and they'd mix it with a little bit of varnish so you get this unbelievably smooth, almost mirror-like surface. They would then paint every tiny part of the painting in front of the subject. A sublime example of this is again Millet's Ophelia. Millet actually brings us to the banks of the river. There's no sky in that painting. We're completely immersed in nature as Ophelia is. And he sat there all summer, all autumn, painting every leaf, every blade of grass, the ripples and water. The wealth of detail in a Pre-Raphaelite painting also conveys a wealth of meaning. Grass that's been flattened in a struggle, a flower which sort of can be interpreted through the Victorian language of flowers. Every single detail tells you something about the invisible aspects of the scene. I find endless fascination in the way they paint hands. Every single hand is telling you something about what that person is thinking. I think the Pre-Raphaelites brought a new, intimate personal quality to painting. They examine characters and their settings in intense detail so that you get this new psychological realism as well as visual realism.
Yeah, this is something where we're in my class right now. We're finishing up, or we just finished up The Awakening, Kate Chopin's Awakening, and that's full of symbolism. It's full of lush, beautiful, sensuous description, and I feel like it's a similar way with these kinds of paintings. But I was going to say it's interesting that it reflects in a lot of ways romanticism. I mean, it really is romanticism in a lot of ways, where it's a look back in time a little bit to medieval period, to things like Shakespeare, a reimagining of the Christ story of the Gospels, of Arthurian kind of chivalry, and an idealization of the knights, and of heroes like this. Nature heavily involved, and I think it makes sense. It's a reaction probably to industrialization, as all of modernity seems to be. This is ultimately going to eventually be my thesis, which is still kind of forming slowly, gradually building, but about modernity, which is generally that modernity is an ending of the constant ebb and flow of decentralization and centralization that occurs throughout human civilizations over history, over long periods of time. It's the ending of this effect of when things part ways into separate local kind of areas and then come back together into a centralized force at some point, sometimes even against the will of local particular kind of groups. Look at Rome, for instance, any kind of empire. Modernity attempts to end that through, this is the major part, is through, capital and through industrialization. So anyway, I'll look into that in other videos especially. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much. We're already past 10 minutes, so but I think these kinds of things are a reaction to that, to a reaction to the financialization of all things, the ending of in many ways, I guess you could say religion, the disenchantment with the world, the scientific analysis and scientific method kind of trying to lay bare everything that once was seen as being, traditional, religious, virtuous and whatnot, kind of replacing those ideas with kind of cold facts and, a world that didn't care about humanity. Anyway, so it seems like it does take part in that reaction to, and even a rejection of industrialization in general. So, yeah, interesting. I think, is it almost done? Let me see.
Victorians are thought of as rather dogmatic figures, but Pre-Raphaelite paintings do not tell you, they ask you.
Oh yeah, Pre-Raphaelites. That's the pronunciation of it, at least based off of this video. So Pre-Raphaelite, not however I said it before. But I always like these paintings. It's interesting to hear a little bit more about it. I've I read a little bit about the small group, the Brotherhood, before. I've read some of the poetry of some of the people who inspired them to do the paintings. But yeah, I think it only lasted a short period of time. I have it written down here, I think, someplace. It's like, I think I have it really only being, 30 years long or something. Which, is actually, is that right? Is that 20 or 30 years? It's pretty long for an art movement, I guess, in modern times, because some of the later ones are like 5 to 10 years. But it shows you the power that a small group of young, educated people, young men in particular, I guess you could say, you can do. And I say that as in, they're more likely to be rebellious against, the current state of things. So, for better or for worse. But all right. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it's interesting to you. And hopefully you like this kind of format. I'm kind of just off the cuff responding to some of these things, and it is pretty late. It's like 1:30 at this point where I'm at. So hopefully it remains somewhat cohesive as a playlist. There's only so much I could comment on in these 4-minute videos, but go check out this artwork. Go check out these video producers or essayists or YouTubers that I go through. Try to support them a little bit. Broaden your understanding of the art form. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you next time. On that note, have a great night, and God bless.